Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life, control your
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 podcast, where we talk about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. We get into politics, business, culture, news. If it impacts you as a Fort Worthian, we discuss it. I'm here with my co-host, Ann Zeta. We give you 3 short stories, 1 big story, wins and losses every week to keep you informed about what's going on in the city. Today, we have Ale Cheka, a middle school public school teacher here at Fort Worth ISD who did an op-ed in the Star Telegram. She will be our big story. But today, for our 3 stories, we have tons of events, Ann, that you and I both attended.
Yes, we've been busy, but we've had to split our time a little bit because some of these events overlapped. So the first event was you got to be the MC or the moderator.
Yeah,
on a panel?
so what Ann doesn't want you to know is that I had to go to the young professionals event for the city of Fort Worth, and Ann got to go to the establishment event at the Fort Worth Club to kiss.
Bid adieu to our city manager.
So we were both at events. One we can talk about, the other one we won't talk about. But it's but we do have our second stories about mental health and a panel that Ann went there, and also she got to see the new JPS building. But mine was for Steer Fort Worth. It was about the future of the city. They do this every year. Steer Fort Worth is a bipartisan civic organization really trying to attract young professionals to be more involved into their city and with the specifics of voting. And so every year they do this panel because of David Cook's going away ceremony. Predominantly people in this space were more young professionals, trailblazing, kind of up-and-comers. Even the panel as well. The panel included people from transportation, housing, Fort Worth Labs, which is kind of a modern planning plus budget department in the city. And then we had someone from the city manager's office. And so at the end of the day, I think I told Steer Fort Worth, I did not want to do this unless I was going to be able to really have an honest conversation about Fort Worth. And I think we were able to get some of that there, but it's just to me, just disappointing, or like how committed, or man, you used the word earlier when we recorded. Used a big word for it. Like the culture of an employee is not to think about budgeting, or they need more funds.
Yeah, they've kind of been tamped down to truly express the need for funding to do the job to the best of their ability. Yeah. These are folks that are subject experts in their field, and one would hope that they would come forward to the elected officials and explain to them, in order to deliver to the citizens of Fort Worth to the greatest degree possible, the highest quality of life, this is what we need. And I think I shared with you before that I tend to have a little empathy for city employees, as I have been an employee to a city in a consulting manner, not a direct employee. But I've had relationships with city employees from cities across the Metroplex, as well as the city of Fort Worth. And then I've been in a volunteer position like you are, serving on the zoning commission and then on the council. And what I've shared with folks is that since 2008, we have had a less budget and underfunded and employed as far as the people that we need to deliver all of those things that a city delivers or could deliver. And so we were tightening our belts back in 2008, and we have continued to do that. And we came up on being the city with the highest tax rate in the whole state of Texas, which was absolutely not a place we wanted to be. That was something that needed to change. So we started chiseling away at that tax rate and lowering that tax rate every year. So those employees were forced to tighten their belts again. We got ourselves to a point where we were not the highest tax rate anymore. And instead of saying, okay, we can kind of level out here and start to look at what kind of things we might need to fund higher and better in the city, we just continued to lower that tax rate. And I think that's where you get employees feeling like they cannot be, forthcoming with what the true needs that they would need funding for in order to deliver those services to the city.
And that's what I said on the panel, thinking about it at the end of the day. If I would have had 4 teachers, it was an hour-long panel, and not one person said, we need more funding. And I think if that was a teacher panel, they would have been like, we are not being funded properly to achieve the goals the state wants us to achieve.
Right. You did say they brought up the fact that TAD has changed how we're doing appraisals, and that's going to have a huge impact on
$30 million
taxes that are collected.
Yeah, and then a MedStar acquisition of communication of how MedStar is going to be ran and managed in the city as well. That was another $20 million. So just off of like the budget, $50 million right there being impacted. Plus, you see what's going on with the federal budget. They talked a lot about possible concerns there, but some of the stuff already allocated for. The fascinating thing about the Fort Worth lab is they're really interested in like this priority-based budgeting where they're identifying dollars that go far and provide a big return and dollars that are a waste of money, and how can we nix the things that are wasting money and invest in the things that are actually going further for constituents. But when I asked the person who was there, does that also mean the police budget? Because we know the police budget is the majority of where our money goes to. And she says, no, we can do priority-based budgeting for everyone else, but it's state law that the police budget cannot be touched.
Yeah, I think a while back we had kind of people suggesting that maybe we look at police budgets and figure out if money could be allocated in different ways to prevent crime and other things. And that got deemed, I'm using air quotes here, that got deemed defunding the police. And our state legislature did not want to see that happen at all. So they literally put in place caps that make it so that you can't reduce that budget. And so that can't even be taken into consideration, or a conversation can't even happen around that. And I experienced that in real time at the city of Fort Worth because I wanted us to consider looking at the funding for CCPD, which is the Crime Prevention Control tax, which many cities put a full cent towards transportation, and the city of Fort Worth only puts a half cent. And we had a conversation back in 2017 about voting on that every 5 years, which the city did for years since the 80s or the 90s. Every 5 years, the citizens got to vote on that. And it was proposed that we only vote on it every 10 years because it passes overwhelmingly every time. And I said, well, it would be nice to be able to have a conversation about it and not have to wait 10 years to have another conversation about it. But that passed, and we can't even talk about CCPD dollars for 10 years.
Yeah, and that's such a sacred cow in Fort Worth, and that's one of the biggest battles that you just see in constituents who are employed here. I mean, they have all this negativity happening to their system. They don't want us to function and actually provide the amenities that we aspire to have as people who live in cities. And yet they don't complain because they're worried for their jobs or, to make their politician who's ahead of them look bad.
I mean, I think it's a very Texas thing to try to constantly be lowering taxes. And one of the other things that kind of came up in our discussions on the Discord was a lot of conversation around PIDs, which are public improvement districts. And those are put in place. There's one in the Lancaster area that's been put in place to try to tackle some of the challenges along that East Lancaster corridor. And there was an article talking about the proposal for a PID in the West 7th area. And so that got people talking about what are PIDs for and what can they be used for and where do they work and where do they not work. And PIDs are basically another way to collect a tax, but it's kind of self-imposed by having to garner the support of a certain percentage of the people within a specific geographic area, and then they agree that that funding will be collected and it will be spent in that geographic area on specific items. And so in the West 7th area, there was conversation about kind of what the bars have brought to that area and kind of increases in safety concerns. And so they're looking at it from that perspective. And there was a suggestion of having it be a broader area that would include kind of white settlement, where there's going to be a massive amount of redevelopment and probably could really benefit from a PID being put in place, because you could put in walkability and streetscape and, utilities and other public improvements that would be for the general area. But because they saw it as a safety public improvement district, they're like, well, those bars aren't impacting us over here, so we don't need it. So I think they had to kind of reduce the boundary of that in order to kind of hopefully move forward with approving that in the future. But that doesn't help everyone. A PID is a specific area. So there's parts of downtown that are not in the PID because there was nobody living in those areas at the time that the PID was put in place. And then when they went back to those voters and said, do you want to expand the PID to have these services come over to your part of the woods? They were like, well, we don't want to pay $12 a month. And so it didn't get expanded. So I don't know. I think it's another way of trying to find funds to do the things that citizens want and ask for. And so for me, it's just about having conversations. Do you want these things? If your government is going to provide these things, government gets money from taxes, and that's how they provide those things.
Yeah, and Texas just likes its hard. Like, I think Texas, we like our high property taxes. I mean, we like our having to fund everything ourselves privately, from our health care to our schools. Everything there, we try to foot the bill ourselves, and then that's why it's expensive to live in Texas. I mean, just the crazy things I hear. I mean, we have employees all across the country, and we have college kids who work in our company, and our college kids who live in California. Every kid in California gets food stamps in college. You get $300 a month, for food. Like, there are, there's New Yorkers who spend $89 a week for 2 kids in daycare. We talk about these people as if all this money is being wasted and it's too expensive to live there. So yeah, you might see an expensive house to live in New York, or expensive, but you don't need a car. There is affordable healthcare. There's affordable services. And so when we talk about Texas being affordable, I think that's the way we get closer to people being interested in this model, is one, us realizing actually how much money we spend personally, because we don't allow the city to provide macro level services to us.
I remember running into an Uber driver in Houston who had moved here from California, and she said she moved here because she thought the cost of living was going to be so much less. And I said, "Did you find that to be the case?" And she was like, the amount of money that she was saying was a difference to me was not a reason to move halfway across the country. It just didn't seem like it had panned out the way she thought it was going to.
Well, I know you went to an event this last week as well with the Fort Worth Report about mental health.
I did. The Fort Worth Report has done an excellent job of having some community conversations and some panels. And this one was specifically a panel where people could submit questions ahead of time. But it was a group of people who work in the mental health profession. And they highlighted a lot of things that I think most of us are aware of. That there's a lack of access and a lack of ability to afford mental health services in this community. But in alignment with having gone to that panel, I also went on a development tour that Near Southside Inc. had. And one of the locations that we visited was JPS. And JPS, if any of you have ever had to access mental health services, currently they have those on the 10th floor of a high-rise building in their complex. And those who are adolescents and those who are adults and those who are there voluntarily and those who are there involuntarily, there's not like separation of that. I'm not sure exactly if it's totally not separated now, but there is just a lot of confluence of things coming together in the current facility. This new facility is amazing. I mean, it has a completely separate adolescent area, a completely separate adult area. It's got nurses stations that can purview and see all of the area where people are at. But all of that being said, it is an emergency intake. And one of the things that came out of that panel was that people are seeking mental health services, even though there's still a stigma, which that was another topic that came up, that people still face stigma about, admitting to or being public about the fact that they might need to access mental health services. But even if you overcome that stigma and you go and try to make an appointment with a counselor, they're like, well, somebody can see you in 6 months. And when somebody gets to the point where they're like, I'm ready to talk to someone, I'm ready to go and avail myself of these services, they don't want to wait 6 months. And then that doesn't even touch the piece of how does this stuff get paid for? Because in my own experience with looking for mental health services for family members, a lot of folks don't take insurance because the reimbursement is low. And so if you can self-pay, then you might be able to get in and find somebody to see. But otherwise, it's very, very challenging. And people's insurance either doesn't cover it or there's a lack of service providers that take the insurance that people might have. And so we're still kind of in this spot where we need to make improvements. And one bright light that did come out of that panel is that several of the folks there said that it would be really, really helpful to have kind of a database where people could go to so that they could see what resources are available. And having that database is probably going to highlight some of the gaps that exist, which will then help us figure out what things we need to put in place to fill those gaps. But everybody on that panel, I think, agreed that they would be happy to be part of, putting together that kind of a database where they could provide that for people so that they would have a place to go to figure out where to get those services.
All very important discussions as we look at, again, I think we're living through a macro onslaught of a hurricane, and we're going to see the consequences of this new regime at the federal level, the state level, our county leadership getting stronger, our council getting weaker. And what I mean is weaker in the sense of building a future Fort Worth due to the consequences of conservative, extreme right aggression to anything that feels like humanity and services for people. And so it just we're entering into a storm if you relied on the government in any capacity for anything, and that is most of us in America. And that's one of the fakest things about capitalism, is that it acts like it does so much and it actually makes America better, but it also relies on a lot of government to sustain. So I'm really going to see what happens moving forward, not just in mental health, but just in the economic viability and happiness of an average person over the next 4 to 8 years, because it just feels like it's getting harder.
So our third story was basically just kind of to help catch everybody up, because there's been a couple articles out about Keller ISD. One of those touched on the fact that I believe the city of Fort Worth did some rezoning of Keller ISD properties that are in Fort Worth to try to kind of alleviate maybe the selling off of some of those assets. A second article came out talking about the fact that the city attorney for the city of Fort Worth has written a letter to the attorney general asking that he interpret the state law to require that there be a public vote on the split. So while we're not going to dive deeply into all the ins and outs of those articles, they will be in the show notes. So those of you who are keeping up with what's going on with Keller ISD and those decisions can read those articles in full.
Absolutely. Today's guest is about Fort Worth ISD and what's the impact of the voucher program that Governor Abbott is trying to expand across Texas. And so today we're going to talk to Ale Cheka. This is her second time on the pod. She's a middle school English teacher. And today she comes to discuss her op-ed in the Star-Telegram, but then also her involvement and the involvement she needs from all of us to support public education. So here is Ale Cheka. You guys just got back from advocating for public schools downtown Fort Worth. Is that correct?
We did.
That is
yeah.
correct. That is correct. That was the most wholesome rally I've ever been to in my life. Would you agree, Ann?
I would agree. It was very positive and pumped you up. You got to speak first, and you got everybody really rallied up and excited to support public schools.
Well, it was organized by an elementary school music teacher in town, Sarah Montanez. And in my personal opinion, now that I have experienced this, elementary school music teachers, but Sarah Montanez specifically should organize all of them, because when a music teacher leads a rally, the chants are coordinated, that they're singing, there's no name calling. Like, it was really, really, really lovely. And like, one of the best parts about it is like the people who were speaking there were teachers and kids,
Yep.
and
parents.
Yeah. So it was lovely.
Well, if you're recognizing Ale Cheka's voice, it's because she was on the pod October. So talking about when we had the superintendent transition, and we moved on from an old superintendent, but you're kind of back here now because you and a group of teachers, how many would we say was behind that op-ed at the Star-Telegram?
You said they only let you put 2 names
Yeah,
on
they only
the op-ed.
let me put 2 names in op-ed, and I'm frantically like counting in my head. There's about 5 of us.
Yeah.
But we collaborated and came up with an op-ed for the Star-Telegram, trying to inform the public about the voucher bill and do sort of a call to action. So I grew up reading Star-Telegram. I've been reading Bob Ray Sanders and Bud Kennedy all my life. So I'm also an English teacher. I like the printed word. So I was very excited to go to the grocery store and get like an actual physical Sunday edition of the paper so I could, clip it out and send it to my sister. And so I'm really excited. I open up the newspaper, and I just hadn't opened up a physical paper in years, and there's a whole experience to it because you unfold it and you got the front page and you flip. And when I read it and I was, flipping through and looking for our op-ed, I was like, oh my God, this is it. Like the stories here, like this is what we're trying to tell people. The front page has this great big old story by ed reporter Silas Allen, and it's on literacy. And I'm an English teacher, so I'm like, yeah, you tell them, literacy, Fort Worth ISD, here's things that we should be doing, here's things that we could be doing, here's things that we are doing. Okay, yeah, literacy, woo! You turn the page, and then there's an article giving people a website so that they can look up how much money their particular neighborhood school is going to lose. And I thought that's wild, because this is not saying if your school is going to lose money. It literally, here it is, Star Telegram in print. This is the website where you can see not if, but how much money your kid's neighborhood school is going to lose. Flip the page. There's our op-ed, right? I would like everybody to know it was 700 words, and my whole faculty roasted me because I can barely say my first and last name in 700 words, but we edited it to 700 words. And then you flip the page past that, and there was a full color 2-page column after column after column with tons of photos, pictures of the expansion of the Country Day lower school. And it was beautiful. It really was beautiful. It's named after the Bass family. They interviewed the architect. They talked about the philosophies that went into building it. But this school has, first of all, it said that all 16 classrooms have vaulted ceilings with natural light. And then lots of explanations about biophilia and how important it is for kids to be seeing the natural world. Their library is bigger than my house. Just their library is 2,002 square feet. They have a fully working fireplace where it says that the librarian treats the kids, to read alouds in front of the fireplace. And it says that this was an improvement and it wasn't an expansion. So it says they're in print, right? It says they're in print that this school is named after a billionaire, that it is not an expansion. There's no intention before or after voucher bills that they're going to be letting more kids into the school. And it's saying that just the library is 2,000 square feet. And so it just killed me that what we're trying to say in the op-ed is this, we're out here crowdfunding Shakespeare books. We're out here crowdfunding Kleenex boxes. And the governor of Texas wants to take the money that is going towards the public school building and then take that money and divert it to the school with a 2,000 square foot library that presumably is already getting funded for the billionaire for whom it is named. Right? And that right there that's it right there of nobody is knocking these private schools. Nobody is saying that they're not wonderful schools. They're wonderful. But it just makes no sense to be taking, we have schools in Fort Worth ISD that don't have a full-time librarian, right? That they don't have a full-time librarian. We have schools in Fort Worth ISD that are having to crowdfund to get the books for their libraries. It makes no sense to take those small funds, towards the private schools. And furthermore, for that front page story about the literacy, no kidding, the school with the 2,000 square foot library has great literacy results. But what policy sense does it make to improve literacy in the public school by diverting the funds that would go towards a librarian, a dyslexia teacher, books in the library, and send it elsewhere?
Yeah, and it feels like if I titled this pod, it would be Fort Worth ISD teachers speak out to Governor Abbott's voucher bill. Is that kind of what would you say is the overall thesis of the article and why you guys wrote it?
Overall thesis is that the voucher bill doesn't do what the governor says that it does. And that if you are a Texas parent or a Texas taxpayer and you think that this is not going to affect you, it is. And last part of that thesis is that we have we've got a little window of time to make sure that this bill doesn't pass, but that window is rapidly closing. So this is Fort Worth teachers asking, begging, pleading for people to call their representative and call their lawmaker while there's still time, because in a month, people are going to want to get upset with their school board member, or, they're going to be upset about why their school is being closed or their kids' teacher is laid off. And like, that is not the time. Now is the time.
Yeah, looking at the timeline here, Ale, it says House Bill 3 is currently in the House Committee on Public Education with a public hearing scheduled for Tuesday, March 11th. So you're right. Like we're talking about, we're in the ninth inning here, and we got to show up at bat.
Yeah, but this is not something where you need to know off the top of your head the names of the bills or the stuff. Like, truly, if you call up your representative and you say voucher bill, they know exactly what you're talking about. You don't have to be an expert in the ins and outs of the state legislature to let your representative know that your kid's education is important to you, and that like Texas public schools are important. So I think that's important to understand, because I think that part of the problem is that people, A, just don't know what the bill does, and B, it feels so like it's happening on a Wizard of Oz level above our heads. But this is a bill that is going to impact every taxpayer in Texas, and it is going to have an outsized impact on every school-age kid in Texas. So it's important.
What is the? Can you break down for listeners? Why is the voucher bill bad, and then specifically why is it bad to the sustainability of public schools?
Well, first, let me explain what the governor is saying that it's going to do. Because if I explain what the governor is saying what it's going to do, then it sounds so good. And believe me, if there was such a magical math universe in which the governor's vision was true, Texas public school teachers would be rallying for it. So the governor keeps using this word choice, that he's going to offer choice to parents, which sounds awesome. Yes, if you're a parent, you want to feel empowered, you want to have a say in your kid's education. And he also has been painting this picture that, he's going to give parents basically a coupon. Like, that's what voucher means, is a coupon. So, hey, parent, if you don't like your, neighborhood school, here's this coupon. Go send your school to the fancy independent school, private school down the street, which sounds lovely. And like, especially in a city like Fort Worth, the private schools that we have are quite nice. We have old and established schools. We have smaller Catholic schools of private schools. And doesn't that sound lovely? And the governor also keeps repeatedly telling everybody that he's going to be able to do this without it affecting the neighborhood public schools. So that's the vision that he's selling. The reality is that all of those things require money, and money is math, and like the math isn't mathing in this situation. So the math is that he wants to give parents a coupon for $10,000, and there just are not a whole lot of private schools that cost $10,000 a year. So if you are somebody who cannot afford the tuition, I'm not going to name names, but I'm just going to say like a tuition of a large private school here in Fort Worth is $27,700 for a middle school. And I know the number because I teach middle school, right? So if you're a parent and you don't have $27,700 to send your kid to that middle school, do you have $17,700? And if you have 2 kids, if you have 3 kids, like, do you have multiples of that? So one, the math doesn't work in that way. Of like, in states where they have done this, what happens is that the same number of kids who are in public schools pretty much stay there. It's not allowing a huge amount of kids who weren't already in private schools to go there. What it ends up doing is that it gives a discount. So if you are somebody who could afford the $27,700, you now have a discount. So for somebody like me that doesn't have kids at all, I don't have kids, but I pay tax dollars so that kids in Texas can go to public school. And I see that as a privilege and a responsibility, but it's a bridge too far for me as a taxpayer and as a teacher, that like the money that I pay towards education is going to subsidize kids who are already in private school, right? So That's one half of it. But the other half is that meanwhile, the public school is losing money left and right because that money that he is giving is a greater amount than he is giving per student to be in a public school. And even if very, very, very few kids do move, the fixed costs of the building stay the same. And I know that sounds super dry, but it basically goes like this. If a school has 100 kids, just for a round number, and then we lose 5 kids and you got 95 kids, the electricity bill is the same. The electricity bill is the same. The heating bill is the same. You still have to have the same number of teachers. So that's, it feels like such a wonderful, magical vision that he is offering people, that it would allow kids to move to private school, and it doesn't do that. But what it does do is that it utterly, utterly, utterly devastates the public school funding, and it wouldn't have the existential crisis level effects that it's going to if we were currently funded correctly. But we haven't had a school funding bill since 2019. And I think that that's another piece that people don't understand, is that if it was like a normal year, then yes, there would be tightening of the belt. But something that we're really trying to communicate is that like the belt has been tightened all the way. There is no extra fat to cut. Ask your kid's teacher, ask your kid, and like across the state of Texas, like we have already lost teaching positions. We have lost extra positions. We're out of money for field trips. We're out of money for everything. And these would be funding cuts on top of that. And like to give people an idea of the funding cuts, whew, I know. Like I hear it when I say it, of when you say school funding and the schools don't have enough money, I can almost feel people that I'm talking to kind of tuning it out because we've heard it so much. And like the reason we've heard it so much is because like all 17 years of my career, we've never had enough money, right? So it sounds like, man, teachers always have a handout. And it's true. Like we are chronically underfunded. And so it feels like, they're saying this, they always say this, they always ask. But the truth is that like the way that school funding budget shortfalls work is that it comes out of our pockets, right? So like this school year alone, I have asked for more things on an Amazon wish list and more things on like just kind of crowdfunding than I ever have before. And it's because things that are usually funded by my school or my school district, like they just can't. So I'm teaching Romeo and Juliet out of a class set from an Amazon wish list. My pencils, Amazon wish list. Kleenex box, like all of that stuff, it's crowdfunded. It's out of, there was a sale at Target and I got a whole bunch of folders, all of that kind of stuff. The problem with this bill though, is that the kind of budget shortfall that we're talking about, it's not that your kid's teacher is going to send an email home and want some extra Kleenex boxes, or they're going to put like a link for an Amazon wish list. It's that your kid's teacher will not have a job and your kid's school will have been closed. Like that's the difference in this bill. And like I can crowdfund pencils. I cannot crowdfund HVAC. I cannot crowdfund HVAC. And so that's where we're at.
And I think Governor Abbott continues to talk about how it's not pulling funding from public schools. But what people have to understand is that, yes, he talks about possibly spending $3 to $6 billion on this voucher program from the surplus of billions we have. But why it's taking money from public school is because public schools get paid by per student in a seat. And so if 5% of the Fort Worth ISD kids take advantage of this voucher bill, that money is the money that kid would bring to the school is now no longer there, which is a way of taking money from public schools.
Yeah, but also that per student spending that you're talking about, it's not $10,000.
Yeah, what? 6?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean that right there, that math. So you're saying that a kid's education is worth $6,000, except if they go to that school, and now it's worth, yeah. Now it's worth $10,000. We're at the bottom. I mean, we are truly, truly, truly at the bottom when it comes to per student spending.
Because you haven't had an update since 2019, and just think about the inflational cost of life since 2019. So when we talk about budgeting, the cost to remodel anything has gone up exponentially. The cost of just staff and people is different today. I mean, 2019, pre-pandemic, we haven't seen those kind of numbers in anything that schools fund, and that's supplies, facilities, and faculty. Those things cost money.
And I want to say on the positive end that, the public school sensibility with money, it's just different. Like, I can probably tell you off the top of my head every single sale for like end of season school supplies. And so can most public schools, public school teachers. And like that times our principals, times our superintendent, times our whatever, like money that you invest in those public schools. That's something that we were trying to share in the op-ed is, while we were at this rally, listen, one of the reasons I had such a good time, and genuinely, like, I had a good time, is because there's so many of my old students there. And, I often talk about, like, going to Target on a Sunday. Like, if I go to Target right now, because it is Sunday, I better be, with some makeup on, because I'm going to run into kids, and they're going to, they're going to want the selfie, and I want the selfie. But, I ran into a young man right there at the rally, and he just graduated with honors from Austin College. That young man is responsible for putting a historical marker up in his college town, right? I had dinner, November. I had dinner. I went to an English teacher conference in Boston, and I had dinner with a kid who was once in my coding class. Like, I'm an English teacher, but I used to have like a coding class. And that kid is a freshman at MIT. That's my second student to go to MIT. Like money, dollars that we invest into kids and like dollars that we invest into programs, it's not going down the drain. It's going into kids. And like, we see those dividends again and again and again and again and again, And so like on the positive end, I do want to make a note of like, with the money that we are given, right, in terms of our budgets and our salaries or whatever, like we try to be really good stewards of that money, and we know how to stretch a dollar, in the way that like anybody who works in like public life, like you know how to stretch a dollar. So that's something else that I wish was talked a little bit more of like not just the schools need, but like look to your right and left at the young people in this town, and like look at the kids who are going to UNT from Fort Worth ISD. There are dorms at UNT where like I taught that whole hallway.
And I know there are also conversations around school closures in Fort Worth ISD. There was a list of about 25 schools. And to me, that's also a big hot topic among people. And in any event I'm at, how much of vouchers dictates that, or is that more of something we're just dealing with outside of this whole voucher thing? What is it the same thing? I also see your op-ed mentioned it in there as well. So how does that play together?
Okay, well, this is going to require a little bit of inside baseball. So here's a little bit of inside baseball. Greg Abbott didn't come up with the voucher bill this week. He didn't come up with it like last month. This was a bill that he tried to pass 2 years ago, and he wanted it real bad. He wanted that voucher bill really, really, really badly because that is his landmark thing. And if he ever does a national run for the presidency, that's what he wants to be able to say for like a soundbite. So like all of us are going through this so that he can have like a soundbite at some point in the future, right? When he wanted that bill, it was stopped by Republicans in his own party who represent rural areas. And if you are in Fort Worth, you're in the best case scenario because we do have, different private schools and different options, but in rural areas, they don't. So he vowed that he would veto any bill that didn't have the voucher, and then he did. So that surplus that you were talking about, that was over $30 billion. So the fact that schools have been in this belt-tightening situation, it makes it seem as though like, my word, we must have been in a recession, we must have been in this, and like, no. Only schools have been in this parallel universe where we're super, 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 super broke, but it is because they starved us. So he made sure that there was no funding bill. That was 2 years ago. So 2 years ago, the funding ran out, national money, like federal money ran out from COVID. Those are called ESSER funds. That money ran out. the school funding ran out, and it is now 2 years later. So the fact that there are 25 schools that are potentially going to be closed or consolidated, that's not just Fort Worth ISD. That is across the state of Texas. So I went to a community meeting for the Diamond Hill Jarvis pyramid because, I live in Riverside, it's my neighborhood. And the accountant guy, as he's explaining it, he kept saying like, I know you're looking for like a bad guy, and there's no bad guy. And I kept thinking like, no, sir, there is definitely a bad guy. There is like very, very definitely a bad guy. And the fact that this isn't just Fort Worth ISD, that it is across the state, the stuff. But EJ, if this bill passes, it's not going to be 25 schools. 25 schools is before there's a voucher bill. 25 schools is because they didn't pass a school funding bill 2 years ago. If they pass that voucher bill, it'll be 25, it'll be 30, it'll be 35.
And to your point about 2 years ago, the people who stopped it, they're no longer there because there was a concerted effort to primary all of those people. And now they've been replaced with people who support Abbott.
But that's also an opportunity. And I think it's worth explaining that to people of, when I say call your legislator, and I know that that's like a thing, that's like a social media thing, like call your rep. But like in this specific instance, the governor was super vindictive and primaried his own people. And so if you're a legislator right now, this is wildly unpopular. Like your own constituents don't want this. This is super, super unpopular across the state of Texas. So like the thing to convince, if you call and say, hey, I live in this neighborhood, my kid is in this district, right? Like you say that you're a constituent, but the other thing is to reassure these lawmakers that if they do show a backbone and they do stand up against this, that we, the voters, are going to support them and give them some cover.
Yeah, I think I had said before that I don't think you should ever write somebody off because you think they're going to vote a certain way, that you as a constituent should contact that person, even if you think they're not going to hear you, even if you think they're in, a different camp than you're in, you need to speak up, because if you don't, then they can just say, I didn't hear from anybody that was against this. So to your point, the newer ones hopefully could be convinced because they've only been there for a minute.
Yeah. And I think that it's just such a different thing to try and convince somebody, and especially like a lawmaker, of, hey, it's a different thing to convince somebody they ran on this and this is like a core belief versus like, dude, your constituents don't like this. Nobody likes this. And so you're not convincing them, that this is a good thing or a bad thing. We're kind of convincing them that like, we will support you if you stand up against this.
And typically when we want to do something different and we think it's going to be a good thing, we look to where it's been done in other places. And I think we spoke a little bit about other states that have gone down this path and how that's turned out for them. I think Arizona specifically.
Arizona really stands out to me because they have just been constantly in the headline for the hot mess that this created, because the funding problems that this created metastasize into the rest of their state budget. Right? So like it seems like, well, education lives in this little corner, but yeah, you super messed with the education budget on such a fundamental level that it created deficits that then spread into the rest of their state budget. And like it didn't do any of the things that the voucher bill promised, but boy, did it sure create a hot mess and a statewide deficit. And so like, I love Texas, yay Texas, etc. Texas, but we don't look to our right and left and see what is happening in other states of like, y'all, if it doesn't work elsewhere, we don't have to do that fun experiment to see what kind of havoc that's going to wreak on our own budget. We can just learn from other people's mistakes.
Yeah. You saw it in Florida where 70% of the people taking advantage of the voucher bill were people already in private school. So they just got subsidized for their current tuition, and it almost was $1 billion. And, that's $1 billion that the state of Florida didn't really have, and now they're spending additionally. And so it's unfortunate because we talked about them having this surplus for so long, and instead of them actually spending it on public schools, they're spending it on a school voucher project that they have that's just going to waste a lot of dollars and impact, physical infrastructure of people and communities.
I think that Florida is such a great example because I think that that is very parallel to what is happening in Texas in terms of the goals. You know, something we talked about earlier is me as a teacher, people as parents, like kids, like our goals around education are not the same as the governor's goals. Like the governor has a goal of, he's in one elected office and he wants a different elected office, right? So like pushing forward a policy because you're trying to do a political strategic move is a different thing than pushing forward a policy because you think that that's the most effective way of serving your constituents. And like what happened in Florida is that the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, tanked, decimated, not just his K through 12 education system, but the higher ed system, which was fantastic. And he did that so that it could be a landmark platform for a presidential run, and he did not make it past the primaries. And so I think that that's another thing that,
Yeah, I had a parent come up to me at the rally and say, why are they doing this? Is there some economic thing that I'm just not understanding? And to your point, I think it is this idea of wanting to run for a different office, which is so abhorrent to me because I think that people should run for office to do that job and then do that job well.
you know, and like to speak a little bit from the heart, I get really wonky, you know, because I believe in knowing your facts and doing your research and whatever. But the fact is, like, the thing that motivates me to pipe up about this stuff is not because I'm just like super into knowing about school financings, because I am super into Langston Hughes short stories and like poetry. I am an English teacher. The thing that motivates me is that I have to go to work. I have to meet these kids in the face, in the eyes. And I want to be able to say to them and to say to their parents, like, yeah, I did something that was like uncomfortable. And, you know, your education is worth it to me personally. Like what we are doing and accomplishing here in this classroom, like your education is worth it. You're worth it as a kid. And, like,
I mean, you told that lovely story about how you ask your middle schoolers about whether or not people listen to them.
yes.
And you shared with me, you know, how you tell them writing something is super important.
Yes. I mean, that's I get so wound up that I stumble over myself, but it really is that of like the perspective that a teacher has to like write an op-ed or show up on a podcast or whatever, is that like we see and talk to kids every day. And so it's not like in theory, what will this happen, or what will like a percentage look like, or what would whatever, like in a super, super concrete way, how does that affect my students? And in a time where I feel discouraged, I feel like my governor doesn't listen to me, I feel like my lawmaker doesn't listen to me. And the story that I shared with you is that on the first week of school, I give the kids sort of an intro to 8th grade English, right? This is what we're going to be doing this year. We're going to read, we're going to write. And when I say reading, the kids are like, yeah, okay, you know, they got their favorite writers or whatever. But when I say write, I get the full body slump of like, oh my word, you know, they don't want to write. They don't want to be writing essays. And so in recent years, kind of the pep talk that I give is I have them raise their hand and I say, okay, if you feel like the adults in your life don't listen to you, raise your hand. And all the hands shoot in the air. All the hands shoot in the air. Because when you start out the 8th grade, you're a 13. When you leave, you're 14. But boy, 13-year-olds, they do not give us rave reviews, the adults in their lives, because they feel like we don't listen to them. They think that their parents don't listen to them. They think that their teachers don't listen to them, that we talk over them, that we don't let them argue their points, that we just, you know, hey, we know best, we know best. And so my selling point and my leverage is to say, all right, when you write, that's your chance. That's your chance to say what you're going to say. And people can disagree with you, but they have to give you that space and time to like really listen to what you say. And so like, I have never written an op-ed in my life. But that's where that was coming from, is in this situation. Well, how can I be someone that tells kids, you know, if you feel strongly about something, don't be complaining to your friends. Like, write it down. If you feel that people are not listening to you, and we teachers complain about that all the time. We feel like our campus leadership doesn't listen to us sometimes. We feel like our district leadership doesn't listen to the time. I call up a bunch of teacher friends who I really respect, who I've taught with for a long time. I know their work, and let's put our money where our mouth is. We cannot control how the governor of Texas reacts, but we can control whether we, their teachers, cared enough to pipe up and sit down and write something and speak up.
Well, Ale, thank you for your time for the second time on the pod. Hopefully there's a third, and hopefully we're coming back with more progress and hope in the right direction for the things we care about.
This was awesome. Thank you so much.
So as we always do, we end our pod with our losses and our wins, ending on a positive note with our wins. And shockingly enough, I had 2 losses this week. I know usually I have losses that I try to turn into wins, and I try to be this optimistic person. But today I had 2 losses, and hopefully they won't all pan out to be complete losses. But what they are is that I read an article that basically said that Fort Worth is spending hundreds of millions of dollars to meet water demands. And I remember in the past, we have put a lot more effort and energy into talking about conservation. And I just haven't heard a whole lot of talk about conservation lately. And when I look around and I see people with St. Augustine front lawns that they're watering the heck out of, I think we need to have more conversations about not using our treated water to water our landscapes. I personally am having my front and backyard reevaluated, which is very much full of dirt right now, much to my neighbor's chagrin, I'm sure, because the grass is greener on the other side. My neighbor definitely has that going on. His yard looks much better than mine right now. But I would like my yard to have beautiful plants that are native to this area and don't have as much demand for water so that I can not be a part of the problem of needing hundreds of millions of gallons of water and spending hundreds of millions of dollars on water that we could be conserving. So that's my first loss, which I guess technically could turn into a win if people take up the mantle of conservation. My second loss is that our neighbors to the east are facing a bill that has been filed, and I don't have the number in front of me, but basically it is a bill to unfund or cut the funding for DART, which is Dallas Area Rapid Transit. And you might be asking, why do I care about what happens in Dallas? I care what happens in this entire region when it comes to connected transportation and alternative transportation modes. Because as we keep pointing to, we are growing, and we cannot widen roads enough to cover all of that growth. We are not going to all be driving around in our single occupancy vehicles, as I always harp on. And to cut the funding of DART is not only scary to the fact that it would have a completely negative impact on DART and its ability to connect and serve the other cities that have transit authorities and the shared transit that we have with DART, being the TRE going back and forth between Dallas and Fort Worth. If the legislature can just come in and cap taxing abilities of these entities, it could not just stop at your transit authorities. This could impact schools. It could impact local government. They all rely on bonds that also rely on ratings. And if you're going to start taking away their ability to repay that funding that they've already allocated, that is going to just mess up the entire funding of all of those organizations. So this is a seriously scary thing. And there's an organization over in Dallas that calls themselves Writing with Data, and they are sharing all of the bill numbers and all of the ways in which you can speak up and tell your legislators that this is not the path that they should be going down.
Well, I'm going to join you on a 2-loss club. My first loss is if you look at public and private North Texas schools, 10 private schools have the lowest vaccination rates for measles, with number 1 being Mercy Culture Preparatory Academy. So again, when we talk about spiritual direction, obviously there's needs for that, but that doesn't mean that it should stop in the name of science and what is actually protecting people. Because we have an anti-vax establishment, we're seeing deaths from measles, we're seeing flu out past COVID impact. So my loss is that, the people who seem to say they mean all well continue to show by data they're actually pitting us the most at harm. So my second loss is continuing on this narrative with Patriot Mobile and the Tarrant GOP. Patriot Mobile held a Black History Month event, bringing in a black politician to talk about how to basically connect blacks to white people to black people to help black people become more like white people who are conservative. And it wasn't an event at all about black voices, black culture. The individual had offenses to LGBTQ, had offenses to hip hop. And again, it's just insane the propaganda machine that's happening from Black History Month events to Beau French's GOP Tarrant takeover of Fort Worth, and this is the golden era of republicanism. To the people fighting for voucher bills in Palestine, Texas. People are trying to tell narratives that we, the people, know are false, and I'm proud. So my win is, I think you're seeing activism rise. There's more PTAs in Fort Worth than ever before. There's the rise of PTA organizations. You're seeing the rise of that in Texas, the rise of involvement, the attendance at school board meetings, the questions people have, people listening to our podcast. We've had record listens over the past 30 to 45 days. People are getting active. People who I never would think take the things I was saying to them seriously, now saying, EJ, you were right. Or, wow, man, my wife's IRS position is gone. Or, man, I used to be able to join work from home benefits, and now the executive order means I have to show up every day, and now I can't take care of my sick parents. These things are impacting people. So to me, the positive here is that things like the 817 Gather, which if you're a listener, you need to come and show up to the 817 Gathers as we start thinking about how to move our feet to directions like we did on Sunday, where Ale and Ann went to a rally supporting public education. We need to be putting that in our monthly agendas. What rally are you going to attend to stand up for democracy? And everyone needs to do it at least once a month. And if we all do it at least once a month, I think the noise will be heard that we don't want the things that they're trying to bring to us. So I guess I kind of took a win from a loss.
So my win is that I think I don't know if I spoke about this. I know I shared it on social media that an organization called Fortress, which provides childcare on the east side, was at risk of closing. And part of that was because of lack of funding that they thought was going to be coming from some various sources, some of which we have spoken about here today. But fortunately, a miracle has happened, and some folks stepped in and funded Fortress to ensure that it could continue to exist and stay open to provide those services for those little kiddos. I've had the privilege of knowing the executive director of Fortress for many years. My son and I volunteered there to paint some picnic benches and to refresh some murals at their previous school location. And that was way back when he was a freshman in high school. And recently I was invited to come and do a walking audit with the kids and talk about like sidewalks and condition of sidewalks and locations of bus stops and all of the things that make a neighborhood, as we did a walking audit around their neighborhood, around their daycare center. And they were a little annoyed because it was kind of hot, and I was a little annoyed that it was hot too. And I felt bad because I thought they were thinking that this was the worst field trip they'd ever been on because it was a little toasty. But it was great that these young kids were learning about city planning and learning about their neighborhoods and learning how they can communicate with the city to share the things that they would like to see in their neighborhoods. And so that school is going to be able to continue to exist because of the contributions of some foundations, which I think goes back and touches on some of the things we've talked about here today, that when we don't fund things through our tax dollars, it can ebb and flow, and they have to go out there and pound the streets and get that support from these foundations. And I hope that these foundations continue to be there to provide the things that are important to making sure that these kiddos have a place to go and their parents can go to work and they can be in safe childcare.
Well, thank you all for listening to the 817 podcast. We'll be back again next week. We also have a March 16th 817 Gather, which you can register for in the description. If you're already on the list, you'll get the invite and the signups. Thank you for all of you who are part of the Discord. You can also join the Discord community if you can't meet us in person. But again, this is not a time to just be a listener. We all have to be leaders.
Cause I do what I gotta to get where I'm going.